Ngalakin Khadijan Nyunga Boja.
Hi everyone, welcome to Lecture 12. Today's lecture is looking at revising the unit and some ideas for the exam. So firstly I just want to say well done. Congratulations everyone. It's week 12. We've done so much this semester. It's just been incredible in terms of moving very quickly to online, dealing with the pandemic and our own health, some of us moving back home overseas. And so I just want to say well done. It's been the most tumultuous semester I have ever taught. Obviously, I've been teaching at UWA for a long time, and this has been the most incredible semester in terms of upheaval, but also in terms of success. I'm just so very proud of the achievements we've made this semester in this unit and how smoothly things have gone in terms of moving to the new technologies and just getting on with it. So I'm really excited for, what this leads to, in terms of dealing with, a difficult situation and just moving forward. So well done everyone. Very, very excited for where we're going. And I just want to say congratulations. Thanks for being a fabulous class. And so let's get on with it. Let's get on with some revision and find out a little bit about what's in the exam and how to get ready for it. So I just wanted to say again, wow, it's week 12, we've done it. You're incredible. You've been an amazing class, and I'm just so very excited that we have got there. And so I've just done up this little comic, if you like, saying, we normally would have a discussion in class about where we've gone and how we felt about the course. So I've just kind of made this up and saying, a lot of people were saying learning online was difficult at first, but it ended up okay. Wow, we did it. What's in the exam? Next up, tell us about the exam. That was fun. Hopefully some people are saying that. Hopefully some of you are saying you learnt so much. I'm hoping some of you are saying I love people analytics. So, that would be a dream for me. And, obviously the big bubble in the middle, wow, we've made it. It's week 12 and we've all learned so much about things like COVID-19, pandemics and flattening of the curve, as well as studying online and studying people analytics online and learning new technologies like Zoom, and we all did it. And you should be very, very proud of yourselves. It's a huge achievement. So exam preparation, let's talk about this exam coming up. So the scope. The exam covers all of our lecture material except lecture 11, which was the Advanced HR Analytics unit. So I really urge you to look at the practice exam paper. I'm going to go through this later in this lecture, but the practice exam paper is the same structure as the actual exam paper, and it gives you a really good idea of what the exam will look like. So the exam is 2 hours, and so that means I've set it up so there's 60 marks on the exam, and so that's 2 minutes per mark. So whenever you see a mark, so the first section might have 5 marks per question, so you spend 10 minutes on those questions. And so overall the exam's out of 60 marks, and then this is allocated back to be out of 40 because the exam's worth 40%. You'll also see there I've written that there's plus 15 minutes, so we allow an extra 15 minutes for you to download and upload the paper. You really need to go onto LMS before the exam and read all the instructions to do with our exam paper and how it's going to work. Basically you'll download the paper, download the Word document, write your answers on the Word document, typing them in, and then upload this at the end of the exam period. So that's the simple version, but you really should read the exact instructions so you know what to do and you don't get flustered on the day. This is an open book exam, and so that means that you can use your notes, your textbook, calculators, anything else, your class exercises to help you with the exam. But you must also realise that with an open exam, it's very time bound, and so you'll need to work very quickly to get through all the questions. You need to be super organised. Get your class exercises out that you've done and have these organised, ready to refer to if you need them. So this is what the front page of your actual exam paper looks like. So have a look. Have a look down here. See down here? So there's 14 pages in your exam paper, and that's because it's got SPSS output that you need to refer to, so that makes it 14 pages. The paper contains 2 parts. So part A is short answer questions. This contains 5 sections with short answer questions. You only complete 2. Please only complete 2 of the 5 sections. So this part A is worth 10 marks. Part B has mini case analyses, similar to the class exercises, and there are 5 of these and you must complete all 5. And this means that Part B has 50 marks allocated to this section, total of 60 marks, recalculated to a mark out of 40 for your exam paper. So that's what the front page looks like. Okay, so in terms of online exam support, recently the university has developed this web page. I've got the web link there, and you can click on there and get more information in terms of invigilated exams and non-invigilated exams, and also exams on our new Examplify, which is the new exam software, or the learning management system. So our exam is through LMS, the learning management system, where you download it and it's non-invigilated. So maybe have a read there and have a read on our LMS for People Analytics in the Assessment 3 folder for more information. Okay, so now let's do some revision. Now let's go through the course. What I've done is I've just picked out some of the most important pieces of all the lectures to give you a really good overview of what we've covered, and this will really help with your exam revision. So, People Analytics. Here are the 12 topics that we covered, the 12 weeks that we did. So from understanding HR and people analytics through to diversity analytics, through to predicting turnover and performance, then up looking at the impact of interventions, and now today summing up and reflecting on HR people analytics. So these are the tools that we've covered. You've learned so many techniques, analytics techniques, you know, multiple regression, logistic regression. These are huge, these are incredible. Multiple regression is the most widely used business tool when we're analysing data. But multiple regression is an amazing tool for predicting outcomes. Logistic regression, so too, is incredible. You also learned t-test, the chi-squared test. We did repeated measures ANOVA. So you've done amazing things in this course in terms of not only people analytics, HR topics, but also these analytical tools. So well done, everyone. Now on LMS, you might have noticed I put this very boring, daggy flowchart, but actually it's just about helping you trying to decide which test to use under what circumstances. So I hope you found that helpful. You know, there are much bigger and broader ones and more colourful ones on the web, but this one particularly focuses on the techniques that we've used in this course, so that's why I like it, because it is more of a simplified version. So, you know, you can work through what's the purpose of the analysis. If we're exploring relationships, we need to think about, are we looking at frequencies or measures, and then follow that down to decide what test is appropriate. So I really hope you find this useful. If we're testing for significant differences, you know, we need to know what's the number of groups. Is it 2? Are they independent or related? Therefore, do we do an independent sample t-test or a paired t-test? If it's more than 2 groups, you know, is it independent or related? If it's related, repeated measures ANOVA, or independent, we use the one-way ANOVA. So you get a feel for how we actually use this flow chart. We just ask ourselves what we're looking at in terms of the analysis, and hopefully it will lead you to the most appropriate tool for this. But so moving on. So now I just want to stop and think for a moment. I want you to think about our first class. Remember our first class? We were in the trading room. Most of us, I know some of us were still overseas because of the pandemic, but we were in this first class and we all needed to do this exercise as part of the class exercise. But what we did was we in class had these big post-it notes and we worked in groups for the first time, and we had to think about ideas for how to respond to a request from the CEO. And so I want to go through these one at a time to look at, maybe think about how we've changed and grown and how we might respond differently to these requests now that we've got the unit behind us mostly. So one team got this question. A request from your CEO. I know that on any given day about 5% of our employees are absent, yet everyone seems to be able to cover for the absent employees, and the work seems to get done. Should we try to reduce this absent rate? And if we did, what would be the benefit to our organisation? So have a think about how we might answer this. So although employees may be able to cover for absent employees and the work may be completed, other issues need to be considered. We know there are hidden costs with absenteeism, for example, costs of paying employees not to work, paying employees overtime or contractors to fill in. And even if the work is getting done, there's the additional costs in terms of supervision where supervisors need to manage the absence. The question then is whether the work is getting done at the optimum level of the human capital investment. There are management strategies to manage and reduce absenteeism in terms of incentives which reward attendance or help reduce absenteeism by addressing the cause. And in doing so, however, we need to think about also avoiding presenteeism, where employees turn up to work unwell and potentially impact others and might not be working to their optimal level. So these are some things we should think about when we're responding to this sort of request from our CEO. So the second group had this one. Our total employment costs are higher than those of our competitors. So I need you to lay off 10% of our employees. To be fair, let's reduce headcount by 10% in every unit to meet this goal. So this relates to our turnover lecture. So this is lecture 6. And regarding layoffs, it's important to consider the logic of the decision, right? So what is our strategy and what is that of our competitors? If these differ, then perhaps it makes sense that employment costs would differ between our organisation and others. Instead, it's important to understand employment costs. Furthermore, the cost of turnover, separation costs and acquisition costs in the future have many associated hidden costs. Furthermore, it makes no sense to introduce the layoff evenly across the board, as some areas of the business may be running more efficiently than others. Also, in this lecture, we learn that some jobs are more pivotal than others in terms of having a bigger impact on organisational outcomes. And really, all of these things need to be considered in terms of layoffs. Group 3 got this one. Our turnover rate amongst engineers is 10% higher than those of our competitors. Please institute programs to get it down to industry levels. So this also relates to our turnover lecture, lecture 6. And the costs of turnover, both separation costs and acquisition costs, have many associated obvious and hidden costs. Instead of considering separation solely on costs, we need to also consider the quality of the workforce. Separations can increase the workforce if the quality of the replacement is higher than the quality of those leaving the organisations, and we know this as functional turnover if you refer back to that lecture. Layoffs are therefore only one tool available to manage and improve the quality of our workforce. Here's another one for Group 4. I read that companies with high employee satisfaction have high financial returns. So I want you to develop an employee engagement measure and hold our unit managers accountable for raising employee engagement averages in each of their units. Okay, so in lecture 4 we found that there was a huge amount of evidence to show that organisations with better attitudes and higher engagement are more likely to be better places to work and therefore ultimately provide higher returns to their shareholders. Note, however, that this occurs under the right circumstances. So under the right circumstances, there are logical and research-based reasons to expect that enhanced employee attitudes and higher employee engagement lead to better customer service, which in turn leads to higher customer loyalty and thus improved profits. The key here is under the right circumstances. Also note that in the logic model, the path from employee attitudes to organisational performance may be indirect. It may be that high employee attitudes lead to a more attractive place to work for high quality job applicants, or it might be that high employee attitudes result in the retention of high quality employees and hard to replace employees. Or it might be that high employee attitudes directly relate to organisational performance via more positive attitudes towards customers. Also, we must keep in mind that correlation does not necessarily equal causation, and other factors might be at play. Okay, group 5 got this one. I hear a lot about the increasing demand for work and life balance, but my generation found a way to work the long hours and have a family. Is this generation really that different? Are there really tangible relationships between work-life conflict and organisational productivity? If there are, how would we measure them and track the benefits of work-life programs? Okay, so to respond to this request from the CEO, you need to refer to Lecture 9 and the impact of interventions. In this lecture, we worked through the logic model for work-life programs, which provided strong evidence for the link between work-life balance and organisational productivity and other organisational outcomes. Working through this logic model helps to explain the relationship to this CEO. Next, the CEO asks, how would we measure and track the benefits of work-life programs? Well, if you refer back to Lecture 9, we talked about the different measures that could be used for determining the impact of interventions. We discussed experimental designs and the importance of control groups and the avoidance of self-selection and the problem with dropouts. And we also discussed the importance of timing for the measures. To measure the change of our measures or metrics over time, we used a repeated measures ANOVA. All of these things could be discussed to respond to this request from the CEO. Okay, if Group 6 got this one, we expect to grow our sales 15% per year for the next 5 years. I need you to hire enough sales candidates to increase the size of our sales force by 15% a year, and do that without exceeding benchmark cost per hire in our industry. So this relates to our lecture on employee performance in Lecture 7, and also to recruitment and selection analytics in Lecture 8, and I'll leave you to think about that one further and how you would respond. Group 7 got this one. What is the value of good versus great performance? Is it necessary to have great performance in every job and on every job element? Where should I push employees to improve their performance? And where is it enough that they meet the minimum standard? So this relates to our lecture on employee performance, Lecture 7, and in particular looking at pivotal talent pools. So I'll leave you with that to respond to this request from the CEO. Group 8 got this one. I know that we can deliver training much more cheaply if we just outsource our internal training group and rely on off-the-shelf training products to build the skills that we need. We could shut down our corporate university and save millions. So this request relates to Lecture 9, the impact of interventions, and I'll leave you with that to respond to this request if you're wanting to do some revision. The last group got this one. I see that there is a high correlation between employee engagement scores and sales revenue across our different regions. Does that mean that if we raise engagement scores, our sales go up? So this relates to Lecture 4 in terms of engagement and workforce perceptions. And so you need to refer to that lecture if you're wanting to have some revision in terms of how we would respond to this request. This question is also looking at the whole idea that correlation does not necessarily equal causation, and that would need to be discussed too. Okay everyone, let's go through a run through of the whole course. Let's revise the whole course, going through Lecture 1 to Lecture 12 today, and looking at the key things that we learnt in each of these lectures. So I'm going to do this super fast, and hopefully it will give you a really good revision of what we've covered and for you to really understand the immense work that we've done in this course. So topic 1 was understanding HR analytics. In this lecture we defined HR analytics, and I'd like to think about how we define this and how you would do this. So we looked at all different definitions, and then we looked at coming up with our own definition. Then next what we looked at is we looked at the human capital bridge, and that's here where we've got investments, HR investments into programs and practices, and then we look at the effectiveness of these in terms of our organisation and talent, and then the impact in terms of organisational outcomes and strategic success. And so we talked about this in terms of the human capital bridge, this part here. Then we talked about the LAMP model, and everything we did in the course was based on this LAMP model. And LAMP stands for Logic, Analytics, Measures and Process. And together these things help us understand people analytics, and we need all these parts. We need the logic to understand how variables work together and what to look at and what the research and evidence tells us both within the organisation and within the broader research. We need the right measures, the measures that are reliable and valid and timely and useful. Analytics, we need to be doing the right, this is the right tools and techniques, and to understand the research question and concern and so on. And then process how we are delivering this and how we are aligning this to the culture within the organisation and really delivering and communicating the message of our analytics. So this is the LAMP model. And next we went on to lecture 2. So lecture 2 was HR, information systems, data sources and analysis strategies. And so we talked about data collection issues, and there were many, as you can see. And then we talked about correlation and causation, and just because two things are related doesn't necessarily mean that one thing causes the other. And so we went on and on about this, very important point, especially because a lot of what we talked about was about regression, which is based on correlation. Next we talked about experimental designs, and we love Solomon 4-group design. If we could do this, this is the gold standard of experimental designs, and so if we could do this within our organisation, we would. We talked about data levels in terms of nominal, ordinal, interval and ratio data, and nominal and ordinal are our categorical data, and interval and ratio are our numeric data. We talked about these things. We also talked about data levels. So data exists in different levels within the organisation, at the individual, group, team, department, organisation, country, and so on. Then we went on and did a whole lot of exercises in SPSS. We did this in the trading room, and we love SPSS, and we had great fun with this. Then we went into R, and we did the exact same exercise in R, and we decided that we don't love R as much as SPSS, but it was still super fun, and we learnt a lot. So that was lecture 2, very hands-on. And then lecture 3, we started doing things with the data relevant to these case studies. So we looked at diversity analytics. How do we understand diversity in the workplace? And so we started with a logic model to say, hey, if we make these organisational investments, we should see these organisational outcomes. So this was the logic model for increasing diversity initiatives and investing in diversity initiatives in the workplace. And there were some direct paths, as you can see. And so then we looked at gender and job grade, and we looked at, is there a relationship between gender and job grade within the organisation? And we found out in this example, yes, there was. There were more females in the lower levels, more males in the higher levels through this chi-squared testing. Then we went on to week 4, and we looked at employee attitudes and engagement, and we love understanding about job satisfaction and what it is and how to measure it. And then we looked at organisational commitment and the different types of organisational commitment. And then we looked at employee engagement and understood the definition and how to measure employee engagement. And then, of course, we had to look at the logic model and say, hey, why do this? Why are we interested in our employees being more satisfied and more committed and more engaged? And hey, it leads to better organisational outcomes. So that sounds like a really great reason to be excited about having a really engaged and satisfied and committed workforce. And so then we looked at an example, and we introduced the idea of independent sample t-test, and we wanted to look at whether people in London versus those in regional offices, whether there was a difference in terms of their team engagement. And we looked at the means here. We've got 80 to 81, and we found out that this was not significant by looking at our independent sample t-test output. And then we went on to multiple regression, and we were looking at predicting this team level engagement with all of these predictors. So this is the first time we looked at multiple regression. We've got our predictors and our outcome, and we looked at how we interpret the unstandardized betas in terms of that becomes the regression equation. The standardized betas tell us the most important to least important predictor, and then the significance tells us which variables are important or significant and which are not. And then we also looked at how we can interpret these beta coefficients. Then we went on to lecture 5, and this lecture was called Applied HR Analytics, and this is the first time that we got into our data for our assignment, and we looked at how we can clean the data and how we can understand the data and how we can, well, we went through these steps, right? We went through steps 1 to 8, and we looked at how we can deal with our string variables and code these into zeros and ones, how we can create composite variables when we have like 5 or 6 items measuring satisfaction or remote, how we can actually aggregate them into one measure and so on. And so we did a lot of hands-on here in terms of first time working with our assignment data and getting it into some sort of shape ready for multiple regression. Then we went on to lecture 6, and we're looking at how do we predict employee turnover, and we understood that there was functional turnover and dysfunctional turnover, and that the cost of turnover is quite difficult and quite large. It includes separation costs, replacement costs, training costs, and then the difference between the performance of those who leave and those who are replaced, who replace them. And then we can expand that further and say separation costs are all these things, replacement costs are all these things, training costs at the top, lost productivity at the bottom of this slide. And so then another thing we did with turnover is we did a one-way ANOVA, and because what we know is with the independent sample t-test is this is just when we're comparing the means of 2 groups. But when there are more than 2 groups, such as here where we've got 4 countries that we want to compare, we need to do a one-way ANOVA. And so we did this one-way ANOVA, and then we had to do the post hoc testing to say, hey, there is a significant difference here in terms of engagement across these 4 countries. Where are the differences? And so the post hoc testing gave us that information. And this is for turnover for the 4 countries. Then we went on in lecture 7 and we looked at how do we predict employee performance. And we first defined employee performance. What is this thing? How is it different to contextual performance? And then we looked at, hey, why does performance vary across jobs? What are some of the reasons? So the amount of discretion and also maybe the strategy of the organisation. Then we talked about how McDonald's differ to Starbucks in terms of what they're wanting for their employees. And you can see these here show us the level of performance on the bottom axis, and on the vertical axis the organisational value. Then we said, you know, why do we want to know about variation in performance? And clearly that means we would reward differently, we might train people differently, select in a different way, and put people in jobs that better suit their skill set. And also it's about identifying pivotal talent pools. So what are pivotal talent pools? This is where a small change in the quantity or quality of employees will make a big difference to the organisational value. And so we talked about who would have thought, but we talked about Mickey Mouse and Disneyland and the strategic value Mickey Mouse has. You know, there's not a lot of leverage there compared to sweepers. You know, who would have thought sweepers, you know, they're the group to focus on in Disney. But we know that because their job is made up of sweeping, which doesn't have a lot of strategic value when, you know, the best sweeper to the worst sweeper, not a lot of difference, but it's that guest relations part of their job that has a lot of strategic value. And so, you know, if you're focusing on one group between Mickey Mouse and the sweepers, it'd be the sweepers where you could actually really leverage to get more strategic value out of your employees. Next, we looked at predicting performance using multiple regression. And we went through this process. With regression, we look at the R-squared, the standard error, the overall model. We look at which variables are significant, the equation, and so on. And so we had summaries like this. So you saw slides like this where I'd say that talk about the R-squareds, talk about the standard error, talk about which variables are significant, then interpret the beta coefficients for the variables that are significant. So if you're asked to interpret a regression, these are absolutely the things that you need to focus on. Then we went into lecture 8 and talked about recruitment and selection analytics. How do we recruit and select people using analytics? And an amazing study by Schmidt and Hunter, we could not go past this study. This is very, very important. And they looked at all the different tools that you could use to select individuals on, and they looked at how each of these tools combined with GMA tests, general mental ability tests, how they can increase the value in terms of selection. And so we went through this. And we also said recruitment and selection analytics, they directly impact employee performance decisions, employee turnover decisions, training performance. So we talked about this. Then we looked at predicting turnover for the first time using logistic regression, and logistic regression is perfectly suited to turnover when you've got a categorical dependent variable. Your dependent variable here is whether someone stayed or left, 0 or 1, and you're trying to predict this using a whole bunch of independent variables, which you can see on the screen. This is the type of output we get from logistic regression, which we're very aware of. And this had lots of independent variables, so it's massive. And then this is how we report the output, right? So if we're asked to, report on a logistic regression, we talk about the overall model being significant, we talk about the variance explained, we talk about the drivers and so on. We interpret the variables that are significant in terms of the odds ratio or the likelihood. One thing also to talk about with logistic regression is the classification table and how well the model predicted stayers and leavers. So that's another thing we do with our logistic regression results. Then we went on and talked about the impact of interventions in Lecture 9. We talked about how most of the programs are evaluated in terms of satisfaction, some in terms of learning, fewer in terms of impact, some about the results, and then return on investment is the penultimate, but very few training programs actually look at this. Then we talked about the logic model in terms of training effectiveness, and the logic here in terms of investing in work-life balance programs, which is another type of intervention obviously, and firm outcomes, organisational outcomes, which you can see the process there and the direct links there. We also talked about the logic model in terms of work health promotion programs and EAP, employee assistance programs, and how these can also improve organisational outcomes. So lots of logic models in this lecture. So then we looked at this example in terms of looking at how values might have changed across different departments. So this is a repeated measures process. And we have values change across time and values change across the different functions, HQ, sales, HR and marketing. And then we have the means here where we've got the function and the time. So we have the interaction shown here. Then we looked at plots of these interactions and then the outcomes. So first testing sphericity, and then looking at the main effects and the interaction. So the time effects, factor 1, and factor 1 times function, the interaction, and then whether there's a linear or quadratic relationship, and then whether there's a difference across function, forgetting about time. So when we look at the results for the repeated measures ANOVA, we therefore conclude in this way. In this example, there was a significant change in commitment over time, and also an interaction between time and function. This increase in commitment over time was linear, not quadratic, and so therefore we could conclude that the introduction of the new corporate values led to an increase in employee commitment to values, and this commitment differed across functions. Then lecture 10 we went into look at scenario modelling and business case studies. And so I talked to you a bit about data storytelling and how with your assignment data it would be very helpful to do this, to talk about not only the data and not only the visuals, but a narrative, some story around this, what is happening in the organisation, why do they need this analysis and so on. I provided you this visual in terms of how we select our data visuals and our charts and so on. And then I talked to you about, hey, when we're catching up with friends, we don't use terms such as, your independent variables are significant, your standard deviation's a bit large, Your beta coefficients, they're all positive. Don't you love the heteroscedasticity? And so on. So we don't use these terms. So we talked all about the importance of using simple language when we're interpreting our output. So I think that came across very well. I've looked at your assignment. Had a quick look over your assignments and they're all looking great. I haven't marked them yet, but I've had a quick overview just to get a feel for them, and they're looking really great. So I think this message got through, so well done everyone. Then we went on to lecture 11 and we talked about advanced HR analytic techniques. And these aren't just HR techniques, these are analytics techniques if you want to go further. And I applied them to HR. But you'll be happy to know they're not in the exam. So this lecture was just to extend you. If you are going into the analytics area for your career, if you want to know more, that lecture gives you a whole lot of information on all these topics here, but it isn't in the exam. So please don't worry about that. And then lecture 12, you are here. This is where we are today. So well done everyone. As you can see, we covered a lot. There was a big journey that we went through. And you've done amazingly well. We've just got to get through this exam. And so what I want to do now is work through the practice exam paper. So I'm going to go through each of the questions and talk to you about how to approach them and how to look at answering them, and give you some really great ideas for answering them. And so yeah, I'm going to go over and go into that paper and we'll talk that through, and then we'll come back. Hi everyone, now it's time to go through the practice exam paper. You can see the practice exam paper is 13 pages long and it contains 2 parts. We have part A, short answer questions, contains 5 sections with short answer questions. And have a look, complete 2 of the 5 sections. Okay, just 2 of the 5 sections. Part B has 5 mini case studies and you need to complete all of these questions. Total marks are 60 and it's recalculated out of 40. So this is the same as the exam. Okay, and we'll just work through. Next page is blank. And now we've got part A. So you can see part A, I reiterate saying there are 5 questions, answer 2. So you can choose A1, A2, A3, A4 or A5. So you need to choose 2 of these to answer part A. Please don't answer all, you don't have time to answer them all. Please just answer 2. So I'm going to go through and give you some ideas of how you would approach these questions to answer them. So let's work through this one at a time. So question A1 says, describe the analytical tool for logistic regression and provide an example of its use. So specifically A, provide an explanation of logistic regression, and B, provide a workplace example of logistic regression using predictors and an outcome variable. You must avoid using statistical jargon. 5 marks. So this is worth 5 marks. So this means you're going to make 5 really good points for this question. You might want to make a few more, but you need to make at least 5 points to get your 5 marks. To address this question, you'd start by discussing how logistic regression is a predictive modelling tool. So it's different to multiple linear regression, as the dependent variable with logistic regression is categorical, not numerical. It can be binomial, meaning there are 2 categories, and we might code these 0 and 1, or it could be multinomial, where there are multiple categories or groups for this dependent variable. Then you might discuss how logistic regression provides odds ratios, or the likelihood of something occurring in terms of its prediction. For part B, for providing an example, you want to make sure that your dependent variable with your example is categorical, because that's the whole focus of logistic regression. And you want to discuss a few independent variables. So for my example, in the workplace, you might want to predict turnover in terms of whether someone has left the organisation or stayed with the organisation. Logistic regression can help with this, as the dependent variable is categorical, so stayer or leaver, and predictors or independent variables may be categorical, such as gender, department, and numerical, such as age, tenure, engagement level, satisfaction level, and number of work accidents. So it may be that we run the logistic regression and we find some variables are important predictors, and therefore the output will provide the likelihood or the odds that someone will leave the organisation based on these predictors. So your answer needs to include something like that. Okay, now moving on to question A2. Last month you joined a large company, Happy Hour Us. This organisation recently conducted their annual organisational climate survey, and they've asked you to interpret their results. The findings were as follows. Average job satisfaction across the organisation, 2.2 out of 5, where 1 is very satisfied, 5 is very dissatisfied. The average effective commitment score was 5.1 out of 7. The average continuance commitment score was 5.5 out of 7, where 1 equals strongly disagree, 2 is moderately disagree, 3 is slightly disagree, 4 is neither, 5 is slightly agree, 6 is moderately agree, and 7 is strongly agree. This is the Allen and Meyer scale. The average employee engagement score was found to be 4 out of 6 using the Utrecht work engagement scale, 9, so 9 items, 0 equals never, 6 equals always. As an HR analyst, what additional information do you need before commenting on whether these figures are a cause for concern or reason for celebration? With this additional information, how would you report the results to senior management? Discuss. 5 marks. So again, you need to make 5 really good points for this to answer this question. So there are many ways that you could address this. There's no sort of absolute right or wrong answer here. But if you think about it, so additional information needed is benchmarking data, sample information, and descriptive statistics. So these are the main things I think are needed to be able to say whether this data is a cause for concern or reason for celebration. So for benchmarking data, we need figures from Happy RS for the last couple of years to make comparisons in terms of job satisfaction, effective commitment, continuous commitment, and employee engagement to see how they're trending. We also would like to have industry data to understand how Happy RS compares across the industry. In terms of sample information, we need to determine if the sample is representative of the population and therefore if the data is valid. We know that we've used validated scales, which is great, so the data itself is good as long as the sample is representative. For descriptive statistics, we need additional information in terms of the range and standard deviation so that we can better understand the results. At present, we only have the means, and these may be invalid due to skewed data or due to large variations in the data. So these need to be considered. So that's for the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, with this additional information, how would you report the results? So to report the results to management, we might write something like, on average, employees reported low to moderate levels of job satisfaction, in brackets 2.2 out of 5, moderate levels of effective commitment, 5.1 out of 7, and slightly higher levels of continuance commitment, 5.5 out of 7. All of these were collected on validated scales. So just in terms of continuance commitment, this occurs when an employee is committed to the organisation because it's too costly to leave, and therefore moderate to high levels of this type of commitment are a cause for concern. Lastly, employees were moderately engaged with the organisation. So as discussed, it would be useful to consider the range and standard deviations to better understand these means and have benchmarking information to understand how we are tracking from previous years and also in comparison to the industry itself. But overall, we are seeing moderate levels on all of these attitudinal and outcome variables. So something along those lines to answer this question. You might have a totally different way to answer it, and that's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just about approaching the question, and so that's one way to approach that question. So the next question, A3, this might sound familiar. Your CEO requests the following. I hear a lot about increasing demand for work and life balance. Are there really tangible relationships between work-life conflict and organisational productivity? If there are, how would we measure and track the benefits of work-life programs? As the HR manager, how would you respond to this request, given your knowledge of HR analytics, evidence-based management, and in particular your understanding of assessing HR programs? Discuss. So for this one, I've already discussed this with slide 15 in this lecture, so you really should refer to that to get some ideas for how we would approach this question. So hopefully that helps. Question A4, recruitment and selection analytics. Explain how people analytics can inform recruitment and selection decisions. Then select 2 selection tools from the Smith and Hunter paper that were used to predict job performance. Discuss how useful the selection tools perform together with the general mental ability tests, according to Schmidt and Hunter, 5 marks. Okay, so we could say people analytics can inform recruitment and selection decisions through informing the organisation about the reliability and validity of the selection tools used, by discriminating between people who will perform well versus people who will struggle, and 3, discriminating between those people who want to stay with the organisation versus those who will likely leave soon after starting. People analytics can also inform recruitment and selection by predicting employee performance, employee turnover, and training performance using recruitment and selection tools. So next we need to select 2 selection tools from the Schmidt and Hunter paper that are used to predict job performance. So you can choose any from the table. For example, I will choose employee interview structured and graphology. So GMA tests are the best predictors of job performance according to Schmidt and Hunter. So using GMA tests plus employment interviews structured provides an additional percentage gain in validity of 24%. So GMA tests plus interviews are useful tools for recruitment and selection. My next tool I select is graphology. Graphology, on the other hand, is not as useful. Graphology is the analysis of handwriting, and GMA tests plus graphology provides no additional information in terms of additional percentage gain in validity, and therefore the combination of GMA tests and graphology is not useful. Furthermore, the use of graphology on its own provides no useful information and really shouldn't be used at all. So something like that for A4. Okay, on to A5. A journal article published by Bazir, Ahmad and Kitchen included the following correlation matrix. So have a look at this correlation matrix. We've got interpersonal skills, salesmanship skills, technical skills, marketing skills, and salesperson performance. And so the dependent variable here is salesperson performance, and that's written underneath the correlation matrix there. So you've got parts A, B, and C. So you need to focus on these. The first one is describe the relationship between each independent variable with the dependent variable. So here the dependent variable is salesperson performance. Interpersonal skills and salesperson performance, the correlation is 0.63. Salesmanship skills and salesperson performance is 0.54. Technical skills and salesperson performance is 0.51, and marketing skills and salesperson performance is 0.52. Therefore, all the independent variables have a moderate positive relationship with the dependent variable salesperson performance. Part A complete. That's a lot for 1 mark, isn't it? B, correlation does not equal causation. Discuss this statement in response to the above example. Okay, so correlation does not necessarily equal causation. What this means is that just because 2 variables are correlated, it doesn't necessarily mean that one variable causes the other. It may be that there's a 3rd variable at play. In relation to this example, there is a moderate positive correlation between interpersonal skills and salesperson performance. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that interpersonal skills cause higher salesperson performance, as it may be that interpersonal skills lead to better closing skills, which in turn relate to greater sales and thus higher performance. So that's a possible answer for B. And then C, below is the multiple regression output, referring to the regression output, which variables are significant in the regression model, why are there significant correlations between each independent variable to the dependent variable, yet not all the independent variables are significant predictors in the model we discuss. So the only significant predictor of salesperson performance here, as you can see, is interpersonal skills with the P equals 0.000. However, the other variables have moderate correlations with the dependent variable, but they also have moderate correlations with interpersonal skills, and thus it's probably due to multicollinearity that only interpersonal skills is a significant predictor in the model, because they're all kind of measuring the same sort of thing. So that would be my best guess for that answer there. You know, you could come up with some other ideas, but that's kind of the main thing that's going on there. Okay, so moving on to part B. So in part B, these questions are more like your case study questions that you've had throughout the semester. You must answer all these questions. Each one is worth 10 marks. Some of them have questions and some of them are just interpret all the output. So it just depends on the question. So question B1, diversity analytics. A manager wants to test whether there's a significant difference between male and female staff in relation to likelihood to leave, employee satisfaction on premise, employee satisfaction remote, employee engagement and last evaluation. So the question summarised the key findings of the analysis in relation to gender diversity and provides some empirically informed recommendations that stem from the data. Refer to the descriptive statistics and independent sample t-tests and use a p-value of 0.05 as the cutoff. So let's have a look at the output. So we've got male and female, their means for each of these 5 measures, and then we've got the independent sample t-test for each of the 5 here. So we've got to think about how we would interpret that and how we're going to write it up. So we might say something like, a comparison of gender differences was made for 5 variables: likelihood to leave, 1 not at all likely, 5 extremely likely, employee job satisfaction with working on premise, 1 not at all satisfied, 5 extremely satisfied, employee job satisfaction with working remote, 1 not at all satisfied, 5 extremely satisfied, employee engagement, 1 equals not at all engaged and 5 equals fully engaged, and last evaluation, which is on a scale of 0 to 1, reflecting the employee's performance rating. The findings are as follows. In terms of likelihood to leave, males with a mean of 3.21 and females with a mean also of 3.21 had similar scores showing moderate levels, and this difference was not significant. For employee job satisfaction on premise, males were 3.22, had a mean of 3.22, and females had a mean of 3.24. So these were similar. They were moderate levels of job satisfaction with working on premise, and this difference between males and females was not significant. In relation to employee job satisfaction remote, males had a mean of 3.67 and females 3.70. So these were similar, moderate levels of job satisfaction working remote, and this difference was not significant. For employee engagement, males had a mean of 2.98 and females 3.04. These were obviously quite similar and moderate levels of employee engagement, and the difference between males and females was not significant. Lastly, for last evaluation, males had a mean of 0.71, and this was significantly lower than females of 0.73 in terms of their evaluation score. So we can see that that difference is significant. However, we can also say that both groups had high employee performance as measured by this last evaluation. You can see those means up here. Okay, so in terms of recommendations, there are a whole lot of recommendations we could make from this study. So we might say it's important to understand why there is a significant difference between males and females in terms of last evaluation. We could also say it's important to understand the sample demographics and ensure that the sample is representative of all employees in the organisations before drawing any conclusions with these results. Lastly, in terms of gender, only a binary measure was used, male-female, and this measure really needs to be broadened out to include the gender spectrum in the future. Okay, so that's one way of answering that one. So let's go to B2. So B2 is a regression analysis. So a group of HR consultants wanted to predict the likelihood of employees leaving within their organisation. Using multiple linear regression, the dependent variable is likelihood of leaving, 1 to 5, and you have the independent variables there of gender, employee role, number of projects, time spent with the company, and employee engagement. So hierarchical regression was used here, where you can see in the first model, gender was added, and then in the second model, we have employee role, number of projects, time spent with the company, and employee engagement was added. You can see the R squared here, standard error. Okay, so the first model is not significant, second model is significant, and here we can see gender is not significant in the first model and in the second model, and what is significant. So if we want to write this up, remember how we report regression output, and so the question here, if I just go back here, the hierarchical regression output is presented below. Fully explain the results for the HR consultant using simple terms. Refer to appropriate statistical output to support your answer. So you need to refer to the numbers here in the SPSS output. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to say, so we need to talk about the R squared. So think about all the things we talk about when we're discussing our regression output. So 25.3% of the variance in likelihood to leave the organisation is explained by the combined variance of the independent variables in the model. This is model 2. So on its own, gender accounted for 0% of the variance explained, which you can see in model 1. So now we just interpret model 2. So 95% of the data fall plus or minus 1.13, this is the standard error times 2, 1.13 data points of the predictions. So model 1 is not significant, model 2 is significant. The significant drivers of model 2 after controlling for gender are number of projects and employee engagement, which you can see here. And so then just interpreting those beta coefficients, we can say that on average for each additional project the employee takes on, the employee likelihood of leaving decreases by 0.04 points, holding constant all other variables. We can also say that on average for each additional point of employee engagement, the employee's likelihood of leaving decreases by 0.458 points, holding constant all other variables. Lastly, we could write out the regression equation. We could say likelihood to leave equals 4.67 plus 0.018 times gender, take 0.04 times number of projects, plus 0.014 times time with the company, take 0.458 times engagement, plus 0.001 times role. So that's one way we can fully explain the results in this question B2. Now let's have a look at B3, predicting employee performance. A HR manager wanted to predict employee performance. The manager used a logistic regression to predict employee performance. 0 equals did not meet expectations, 1 equals met expectations, with the following predictors: percent remote, employee role, employee satisfaction on premise, employee satisfaction remote, employee engagement and average monthly hours, time spent with the company and work accidents. So this data might sound familiar. So we're running a logistic regression. We know that because that's what we're told, but also the dependent variable is categorical. 0 equals did not meet expectations, 1 equals met expectations. Here we're told the logistic regression output is presented below. Fully explain the results for the HR manager using simple terms. Refer to appropriate statistical output to support your answer. So here is all the output when the model is significant. This is your R squared, your pseudo R squared, your classification table, and the variables in the model. So how could we talk about this? So we need to think about all the things we talk about in terms of this output. So we could say the overall model is significant. Up here, the overall model is significant. And 42.5% of the variance in employee performance is explained by the combined variance of the independent variables. Then if we go to the classification table, okay, the classification table shows that with a cut point of 0.5, it correctly predicted 38.9% of those employees who did not meet expectations and correctly predicted 95.5% of employees who met expectations. This also means that it incorrectly predicted performance for 61.1% of those who did not meet expectations and 4.5% of those who did meet expectations. So that's the classification table. Now if we go down, we can see that the significant drivers of employee performance are percent remote, employee role, employee satisfaction on premise, employee satisfaction remote, time spent with the company, and work accidents. So quite a few there to interpret. So now if the beta's value is negative, we have to invert the exponential b, 1 divide that number to get the odds ratio. And so if we start with percent remote, this one's negative. So what we see is that employees with higher scores on percent remote are less likely to meet expectations. And for employee role, we can see that the that those employees with a higher score on employee role are more likely to meet expectations. For each additional 1 unit on employee role, the employee is 6.7 times more likely to meet expectations. Employee satisfaction on premise, we can see that this is negative, so we need to invert the number. And so therefore employees with a higher satisfaction on premise are less likely to meet expectations. So for each additional unit on satisfaction on premise, the employee is 2 times less likely to meet expectations. Employee satisfaction remote is positive, so a little bit easier. We can say that employees with higher satisfaction working remotely, they're more likely to meet expectations. For each additional unit on satisfaction working remotely, the employee is 3.3 times more likely to meet expectations. Time spent with the company is negative, so we need to invert this. Therefore, employees with longer tenure are less likely to meet expectations. For each additional year of tenure with the company, the employee is 1.3 times less likely to meet expectations. Lastly, work accident, which is categorical, we need to invert, and therefore if the employee had a work accident, they are 3 times less likely to meet expectation, or if the employee didn't have a work accident, they're 3 times more likely to meet expectations. So there's a lot there, isn't there? And so for 10 marks, we're looking at all of these things to interpret for the logistic regression. Okay, going on to B4, monitoring the impact of interventions. This was lecture 9, wasn't it? So a HR manager wanted to test whether a mentor program would improve employee engagement levels. To do so, a randomly selected group of employees were provided a mentor and encouraged to meet regularly with their mentor. To test the effectiveness of the program, the HR manager measured employee engagement both before and again after 6 months, and also measured the age of the mentor before and after. So now we've got parts A, B, C and D that we need to address. A, discuss whether there is a significant improvement to engagement levels and refer to relevant statistics. So part A, employee engagement before the introduction of the mentor program was 4.4 and increased to 5.46 when measured 6 months after the introduction of the program. This was a significant improvement in engagement levels, and P equals 0.000. So we can see here. Okay, so part B, discuss whether there's a significant improvement to engagement levels dependent on age of mentor. Make sure you refer to relevant statistics. So this is the interaction. Here. Okay, so part B, engagement levels for those under 50 were 4.44 and then they increased to 5.22 for the period 6 months after the introduction of the mentor program. For those employees aged 50 and over, their engagement level was 4.37 before the introduction of the mentor program, and it increased to 5.7 6 months after the introduction of the program. The interaction was not significant, P equals 0.205, and therefore the improved engagement levels for both age groups were much the same. So part C, draw an overall conclusion on the results. So I might say something like, overall the introduction of the mentor program has improved employee engagement over time from a mean of 4.40 to 5.46. There was no difference in engagement levels between the two age groups, with those employees aged 50 years and older having a mean of 5.03, which was similar to employees under 50 years of age with a mean of 4.83. Across the two time periods for the two age groups, the improvement in engagement was fairly similar, and therefore the impact of the mentor program improved engagement for different age groups in much the same way. So that's kind of an overall for that one. And then just lastly, discuss one concern with the study. So I don't know if you've thought about some concerns already, but one concern from the study that was obvious to me is that there's no control group there's no control group used at all. So we don't know how this compares to a control, and we know the importance of having a control group, and you could talk about that. You could also talk about the fact that there was no control on how the mentor and mentee interacted during the meetings. So therefore it's difficult to determine whether it was the mentorship program that improved employee engagement, or maybe it was something else that happened in the organisation So if it was the mentor program, it's difficult to know what aspects of the mentor program made it successful because there was no structure in the program. So you can talk about any of these sort of things for a question like that for 2 marks. So that's question B4. Now question B5 is looking at employee attitudes and engagement. So here we've got a regression analysis. HR manager wanted to determine the key drivers of employee engagement. The multiple regression outputs below, the dependent variable is employee engagement on a 1 to 10 scale, and the independent variables are gender, job satisfaction, job level, and job complexity. So we've got here, discuss which variables are significant predictors, and make sure you comment on the model quality too, write out the regression equation. Okay, so we've got the R-squared, standard error, overall model, and the significance of the variables here. So I would just take our standard output that we always talk about when we talk about regression. So 30.2% of the variance in the model in employee engagement is explained by the combined variance of the independent variables in the model. 95% of the data for plus or minus 2.9 data points of the predictions. This is the standard error times 2. We can see the overall model significant. The significant drivers of employee engagement are job satisfaction, where we can see the P is 0.001, which is less than 0.05. And we can also see job complexity with a P of 0.004, which is less than 0.05. We can interpret the beta coefficients for the significant variables as, on average, for each additional unit of job satisfaction, employee engagement increases by 0.377, holding constant all other variables. Here for job complexity, we can say on average for each additional unit of job complexity, employee engagement increases by 0.456, holding constant all other variables. And then lastly, we can write out the equation. We can say employee engagement equals 2.64 minus 0.185 times gender plus 0.377 times job satisfaction plus 0.052 times job level and plus 0.456 times job complexity. And that would answer that question. End of the paper. So hopefully that's helpful, everyone, in terms of how we can approach these questions and what sort of answers. You should know that on the actual exam paper there are more directed questions. There are some of the open questions as well. And yeah, but hopefully you've got an idea of how we would respond to the questions. So I really hope that helps everyone, and good luck with your study. Hi everyone, hopefully you found that helpful in terms of the practice exam and some of the ideas of how to address the questions and some of the solutions. So hopefully you're now well set up to go and do a whole bunch of revision in this area and be ready for our exam paper when that's on. So good luck everyone. Congratulations for this semester and getting through all the difficulties that we had due to the pandemic and online learning and Zoom and everything else. You did amazingly well. You should be really, really proud of yourselves. Thank you very much for being such a great class. Please stay in touch with me. Please jump on LinkedIn and link me into your LinkedIn profile and so on. And yeah, I'd really love to stay in touch and see how you use analytics in the future for your career. Always feel free to reach out to me. I'm always excited to hear about how you're using analytics for work, for home, whatever it is. Yeah, thank you so much everyone. And yeah, really special semester this semester. I just really loved it and love getting to know you. So all the very best everyone. And I will see you on Zoom.